Tonight, you're invited to slow down, to rest your thoughts, and to drift gently into sleep. Welcome to the Ghost Fleets, Untold Stories of America's Forgotten Maritime Industry, a quiet journey through empty harbors, motionless ships, and the calm routines of a world that no longer rushes. That as you listen, allow your breathing to settle. There's nothing you need to remember, and nowhere you need to go. If these peaceful stories help you fall asleep faster, you're warmly invited to subscribe. So more gentle nights like this are always waiting for you. And before you drift away, you may leave a comment sharing where you're listening from: a city, a coastline, or a quiet room somewhere in the world. It helps this calm space reach others who need rest. Now, get comfortable. Let the night take over, and allow this story to carry you into deep, natural sleep. There was a time when American harbors never truly slept. Even late at night, long after office lights dimmed and city streets grew calm, the ports remained awake in their own slow, steady way. The water shifted gently against pilings, ropes creaked with the tide. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded low, patient, unhurried. This chapter begins in those moments just before silence fully arrived. Along the coasts of the United States, harbors once formed the steady heartbeat of daily life. Ships came and went with such regularity that their presence felt permanent. Cargo vessels rested at the docks like dependable guests. Tugboats traced the same paths again and again, guiding arrivals with practiced ease. Workers knew the rhythms by heart: what time the morning ship would arrive, when the afternoon tide would turn, how long the evening unloading would last. Nothing about it felt dramatic. It was simply how things were. In those days, the ports did not try to impress. They functioned quietly, efficiently, and predictably. The same cranes lifted the same types of cargo each day. The same warehouses opened their doors at dawn and closed them again at dusk. Paperwork moved from one desk to another in a familiar sequence, stamped, signed, and filed away. Everything followed an order that rarely changed. For the people who worked there, the harbor was not a place of excitement. It was a place of routine, a place where hours passed slowly and steadily, measured not by clocks but by tides, schedules, and weather that changed only a little at a time. Then, gradually, almost without announcement, the rhythm softened. Ships began arriving less frequently, not all at once, and not enough to cause alarm. A missed arrival here, a delayed departure there. At first, no one paid much attention. Harbors had always experienced quiet days. That was nothing new. But as weeks turned into months, and months into years, the spaces between arrivals grew wider. Docks that once held several vessels at a time now held only one, or sometimes none at all. Cranes stood idle longer than usual, their long arms resting motionless against the sky. The sounds that once filled the arena, voices, machinery, became softer, then occasional, then rare. The water noticed first. Without the constant movement of hulls and propellers, the harbor surface grew smoother. Reflections lingered longer. The gentle slap of waves against steel gave way to a quieter, slower motion. The water resumed its own pace, unconcerned with schedules or shipping manifests. The ships that remained seemed to sense the change as well. Some stayed tied to their berths longer than expected, waiting for assignments that never came. Their paint slowly dulled beneath sun and salt. Rust appeared in thin lines along railings and seams, unnoticed at first, then accepted as normal. Decks that once felt busy beneath moving feet grew still. Inside these vessels, corridors echoed softly when someone walked through them. Cabins remained prepared but unused. Engine rooms sat clean and ready, yet silent. Logs continued to be kept, even when there was little to record. Idle, but maintained. The notes might say ... around the harbor. The changes unfolded quietly. Warehouses closed one section at a time. Lights remained off in rooms that had once stayed illuminated through the night. Offices downsized their operations, reducing staff without urgency or drama. Desks were cleared. Filing cabinets were locked and left behind. Coffee mugs stayed where they had always been, simply unused, but the people who remained adjusted their routines without complaint. Dockworkers arrived a little later in the morning. Engineers performed inspections less frequently, though just as carefully. Security guards made their rounds through larger, empty spaces, listening to the sound of their own footsteps as they moved past. Silent equipment. There was no single moment when anyone declared the harbor quiet. Instead, it happened the way evening falls slowly, gradually, without drawing attention to itself. Some ships were officially retired, their paperwork completed, their duties formally ended. They were towed to quieter anchorages or left moored at distant piers. Others remained technically active, though no longer assigned to regular routes. They waited, just in case, their readiness preserved through habit and professionalism, rather than necessity to stand on the shore during those years was to witness a subtle transformation, where once there had been layers of sound engines humming, metal shifting, voices calling instructions, now there was space. The wind moved more freely. Seagulls lingered longer on railings without being disturbed. The air carried fewer odors of fuel and cargo, replaced instead by salt and open water. At night, the harbor lights reflected more clearly across the surface, uninterrupted by passing hulls. The reflections stretched and wavered gently, creating patterns that moved slowly, predictably, and without urgency. The harbors did not resist this change. They adapted. Concrete piers continued to weather seasons of sun and rain. Wooden pilings absorbed the slow work of tides. Bollards waited patiently, their thick steel forms still capable of holding ropes, even if none were tied to them for long periods of time. In many coastal towns, residents noticed the difference in subtle ways. Morning traffic thinned. Fewer trucks rumbled through nearby streets. Cafes that once opened early to serve dockworkers adjusted their hours. Some closed altogether, while others remained, serving fewer people with the same quiet dedication as before. Conversations shifted topics. Instead of discussing schedules and shipments, people spoke of weather, fishing conditions, and memories of how busy things used to be. These conversations carried no bitterness, only observation. Children growing up near the water experienced a different harbor than their parents had known. They learned to recognize ships that never moved. They played near docks that felt permanent in their stillness. For them, the quiet was not a loss. It was simply normal. Time passed, and with time came acceptance. The ships that no longer sailed found a new role, not as carriers of cargo, but as markers of history. They stood as reminders of a period defined by steady movement and predictable labor. Their presence was no longer functional, but it was meaningful in its own way. Maintenance crews continued to visit them, following checklists that had changed little over the years. Paint was reapplied, pumps were tested, hulls were inspected. Each task was performed slowly, carefully, and without rush. There was comfort in these routines. Even without voyages ahead, the ships were treated with respect. Their design still spoke of durability and purpose. Their decks, though quiet, retained the shape of countless journeys. Their names, painted along their bows, remained legible, even as letters faded slightly beneath sun and salt. That the harbors themselves became places of reflection. People walked along the edges, watching the water. Some paused to read old plaques or observe ships resting in place. Others simply sat on benches, listening to the sounds that remained: wind, water, distant traffic, softened by distance. In this quiet, there was no urgency to move on. The absence of activity created space for stillness, and stillness allowed for rest. The harbor, once defined by constant work, now offered something else entirely: calm. And in that calm, the story of the ghost fleets truly began, not with departure, but with rest. Long before silence settled over the harbors, the ships themselves were created with a different future in mind. They were not designed for brief service or temporary usefulness. They were built to last decades at sea, thousands of miles traveled, and countless crossings measured not in excitement, but in reliability. American cargo vessels, tankers, and freighters were engineered with patience. Their construction followed principles that favored strength over speed and endurance over elegance. Steel plates were thick and heavy, layered carefully along hulls meant to withstand rough weather, saltwater corrosion, and the steady pressure of long journeys. Rivets and welds were applied methodically, each one serving a specific purpose. Nothing was rushed, nothing was ornamental. In shipyards along the coasts and rivers of the United States, these vessels took shape slowly. Sections were assembled piece by piece, often over months or years. Workers followed blueprints that had evolved through generations of maritime experience. Measurements were checked, then checked again. Each compartment, each bulkhead, each deck level, existed because it had proven necessary over time. These ships were not built for attention, they were built for work. Cargo. Ships featured wide holds designed to carry everything from grain to machinery. Tankers were shaped to move liquids safely and steadily. Their interiors divided into carefully planned compartments that balanced weight and pressure. Freighters combined flexibility with durability, able to adapt to different cargo needs without compromising stability. Everything about these vessels reflected a belief in continuity. They were meant to sail familiar routes repeatedly, stopping at the same ports, guided by the same charts. Their engines were designed for steady output rather than bursts of speed. Their controls emphasized reliability, simplicity, and ease of maintenance. Inside the engine rooms, systems were laid out with clarity. Pipes followed predictable paths. Valves were placed where they could be reached easily. Gauges provided information without excess complexity. Engineers learned these spaces intimately, memorizing the location of every switch and lever until the ship felt less like a machine and more like a routine. The living quarters followed a similar philosophy. Cabins were modest and functional. Bunks were sturdy. Storage spaces were practical rather than generous. There was no expectation of luxury-only comfort sufficient for long periods at sea. Hallways were narrow but efficient, designed to move crew members quickly and safely during both calm and challenging conditions. Even the bridges reflected this mindset. Windows were wide and clear, offering unobstructed views. Instruments were arranged logically, allowing navigators to perform their duties without distraction. Chairs were designed for long watches, supporting alertness during hours of steady observation. Every detail pointed toward longevity. When these ships first entered service, they did so quietly. There were no ceremonies beyond simple acknowledgements. Once launched, they blended into the rhythm of maritime commerce almost immediately. Their presence expected and dependable. Years passed, trips accumulated, logs filled with entries that read much the same from day to day. Weather conditions, engine performance, arrival times, departure times. Small variations were noted, but nothing dramatic. That was the goal. The success of these ships lay in their ability to remain unremarkable. They endured storms without complaint. They crossed calm seas without celebration. They docked, unloaded, loaded again, and departed according to schedule. Their value was measured not by stories, but by consistency. Maintenance played a central role in this endurance. Regular inspections were carried out with care. Hulls were cleaned and repainted. Engines were serviced methodically. Components were replaced before failure could occur. Each task followed procedures refined over decades, ensuring that the ship remained reliable long after its launch date faded into memory. Crews developed a quiet respect for the vessels they served on. They knew the sounds of their ships, the subtle differences between normal vibrations and unusual ones. They recognized the hum of engines operating smoothly. They noticed changes in pitch or rhythm immediately, responding without urgency but with attentiveness. This relationship between ship and crew was built on trust. The ship carried them safely. They cared for the ship in return. As time went on, newer technologies began to emerge. Designs shifted. Materials improved. Systems became more automated. The maritime industry evolved, as industries always do. But these older ships did not become obsolete overnight. They continued to operate, their sturdy construction allowing them to remain useful even as newer vessels entered service. In many cases, they outlasted expectations, serving well beyond their original projected lifespans. Decades passed, eventually. However, the world around them changed more rapidly than they could. Shipping routes adjusted, economic priorities shifted, logistics moved towards speed and scale rather than steady repetition. Ports modernized to accommodate different types of vessels, leaving less room for older designs. The ships themselves did not fail, they were simply no longer needed in the same way. One by one, they were withdrawn from active service, not because they were incapable, but because the system that relied on them had moved on. Some were reassigned briefly, used as backups or reserves. Others were anchored and maintained, kept ready just in case. And some were left to wait. These ships, built to last, found themselves without purpose. They remained structurally sound, their hulls still strong, their engines, though silent, still capable of operation with proper preparation. Yet they stayed moored, their readiness preserved without destination. Time treated them gently at first, paint faded gradually, surfaces weathered evenly. The sea left its marks slowly, without aggression. Maintenance continued, though less frequently, preserving function rather than appearance. Inside, dust settled in places once cleaned daily. Cabins remained orderly, their bunks untouched. Engine rooms stayed dry and organized, awaiting instructions that never came. Their design, once a symbol of endurance, now contributed to their stillness. Because they were built so well, there was no urgency to dismantle them. They could wait indefinitely, and so they did. Years went by, new generations passed these ships without knowing their histories. To casual observers, they appeared unchanged, large, quiet, and motionless. Their durability made them seem permanent, even as their role faded. The ships did not deteriorate quickly. They aged the way solid structures do, slowly, predictably, without collapse. This gradual aging carried a quiet dignity. There was no sudden failure, no dramatic end. Just a steady transition from active service to silent presence. The harbors that held them adjusted accordingly. Berths once assigned to regular traffic became long-term resting places. Maintenance schedules were simplified. Documentation continued, though entries grew shorter. Status unchanged, the logs might read. These ships, once essential, now existed as reminders of a time when reliability mattered more than speed, and durability outweighed novelty. They were monuments to an era of steady movement and careful design, and in their stillness, they embodied the very quality they had been built for all along. Endurance, forgotten by time, perhaps, but never rushed, never fragile, and never truly gone. They waited quietly, just as they had always done their work, patiently, reliably, and without asking for attention. The work of the harbor was never fast. It moved at the pace of the water, the weight of cargo, and the steady rhythm of human hands repeating familiar motions. For dockworkers and deck, each day unfolded much like the one before it, guided not by urgency, but by routine. Morning often began before the sun fully rose. Along American ports, workers arrived quietly, their footsteps echoing across wide concrete piers still cool from the night air. The harbor greeted them with familiar sounds, water shifting gently against hulls, ropes creaking under tension, the distant call of seabirds beginning their day. There was no rush, schedules were known, tasks were predictable. Each person understood where to go and what to do without needing instruction. This familiarity created a sense of calm. Even before the work began, dockworkers gathered near loading zones, checking manifests and confirming assignments. The paperwork was simple and repetitive, reviewed carefully but without stress. Cargo lists rarely changed. Equipment stood ready, exactly where it had been left the previous day. The first hours passed slowly. Cargo was moved, piece by piece. Crates were lifted, set down, and secured. Pallets were guided into position, aligned carefully with markings worn into the dock surface over years of use. Each movement followed a practiced sequence, designed to minimize effort and reduce strain. There was comfort in this repetition. Hands learned the weight of familiar loads. Muscles adjusted to the rhythm. breathing aligned naturally with the work. There was no need to hurry. Tides dictated the pace, and tides could not be rushed. Deckhands aboard the ships followed their own steady routines. Ropes were checked and rechecked. Knots were tied, untied, and tied again. Lines were coiled neatly and stored in their usual places. The condition of each rope was assessed by touch as much as sight, fingers tracing fibers worn smooth by time and use. These tasks required attention, but not urgency. A deckhand might spend several minutes adjusting a single line, ensuring it rested just right against the bollard. Small adjustments were made without comment, each one part of a process refined through experience. Between tasks, there was waiting. Waiting for cargo to arrive, waiting for inspections to finish, waiting for the tide to shift. This waiting was not empty time, it was filled with observation. Workers leaned against railings, watching the water rise and fall. They noticed changes in the wind, the way clouds moved across the sky, the subtle shifts in light as morning became afternoon. Conversation, when it happened, was unhurried. Short exchanges passed between coworkers confirming measurements, sharing updates, or simply acknowledging the passing hours. There was no need for extended discussion. Everyone understood the work well enough that few words were required. As the day progressed, the sun climbed higher, warming the docks and decks. Metal surfaces absorbed heat slowly, becoming warm beneath the hands. The scent of saltwater mixed with oil and weathered wood. These familiar smells marked the passage of time as reliably as clocks. Lunch breaks came and went quietly. Workers sat where they could find shade, eating simple meals packed earlier that morning. There was no rush to return to tasks. The tide would turn when it turned, and until then, there was little reason to hurry. Afternoons often stretched, long cargo continued to move, though at a pace that never felt hurried. Equipment was operated smoothly, without sudden movements. Cranes lifted and lowered their loads in wide, gentle arcs, controlled by operators who knew their machines intimately. Each lift followed the same pattern: attach, lift, swing, lower, release, over and over. The work remained much the same. They walked the length of the ship repeatedly, inspecting fittings and surfaces. They checked hatches, ensuring seals were secure. They cleaned small areas as needed, maintaining order more than appearance. These were not tasks that demanded creativity or decision-making. They demanded consistency. The tide remained a constant presence. Workers checked tide tables instinctively, aware of how water levels affected every aspect of the day. A rising tide brought subtle shifts in tension on lines. A falling tide required adjustments to prevent strain. These changes happened gradually. Adjustments were made slowly, without interruption. No alarms sounded. No urgent commands were needed. Everyone understood what to do, and when to do it. As afternoon gave way to evening, the harbor grew quieter. Some tasks concluded. Others paused, waiting for conditions to change. Equipment was secured for the night. Tools were returned to their places, each one set down carefully, ready for the next day. There was satisfaction in this order. Nothing was left undone. Nothing was rushed to completion. Each task ended naturally, not abruptly. For many workers, the end of the day arrived almost unnoticed. One moment, they were adjusting a line or checking a manifest. The next, the light had shifted, and it was time to leave. There was no announcement, no signal, just an understanding that the work had reached its natural stopping point. They walked away from the docks as quietly as they had arrived. Behind them, the harbor settled into its evening state. Ships remained tied, their lines steady. The water moved gently, reflecting the changing colors of the sky. Lights came on one by one, illuminating spaces now free of movement. The work did not feel unfinished, it felt paused. This rhythm repeated. Day after day, there were no dramatic moments. No stories of sudden change. Just long hours filled with predictable tasks, familiar movements, and patient waiting. Over time, these routines shaped the people who performed them. Movements became efficient. Decisions became instinctive. The body learned what the mind no longer needed to consider. This created a sense of ease. Even during physical labor, the harbor rewarded patience. Those who moved slowly avoided mistakes. Those who observed carefully noticed changes early. Those who respected the tide worked in harmony with it rather than against it. As the years passed, and the harbors grew quieter, these routines remained largely unchanged. Even as fewer ships arrived, the work continued for those that remained. Cargo still needed to be handled. Lines still needed attention. Tides still needed respect. The long days stretched on, steady and unremarkable for dockworkers and deckhands. This consistency was not boring, it was reassuring. In a world that often rushed forward without pause, the harbor offered something rare, a place where time moved slowly, predictably, and without pressure. And in that slow movement, there was rest. Even now, in quieter ports and less active harbors, echoes of these routines remain. The marks on the docks, the worn paths along decks, the smoothness of frequently handled ropes all tell the same story. A story of long days, steady hands, and work that unfolded at the speed of the sea. And for those who listen closely, the harbor still whispers that rhythm, soft, repetitive, and calm, inviting the mind to slow down and rest. When the ships stopped moving, time did not dot it, continued quietly, steadily, without concern for schedules or purpose. Along the edges of harbors and in sheltered anchorages, the abandoned vessels remained where they were left, resting gently on the water. Around them, the slow work of nature began, not suddenly and not harshly, but patiently. Salt water was always present. It touched the hulls lightly at first, leaving thin traces along the waterline. As tides rose and fell, the sea brushed against steel again and again, never hurried, never forceful. Each contact left behind a faint memory, salt drying in the sun, invisible until it accumulated. Day after day, this cycle repeated. Water rose, water fell, salt remained. The ships did not resist. They had been built to endure the sea, and for a long time, they did. Their paint held firm. Their steel stayed strong. The changes were subtle, almost impossible to notice from one day to the next. Weeks passed into months. The wind joined the process. It moved across decks and railings, carrying fine particles of salt and moisture into corners and seams. It found small openings, places where paint had thinned, where edges met, where bolts held steel together. The wind did not force itself inside. It waited for opportunity, and opportunity always arrived eventually. Sunlight played its role as well. Under its warmth, painted surfaces expanded slightly. At night, as temperatures cooled, they contracted again. This gentle movement, repeated countless times, caused paint to loosen in tiny, invisible ways. Microscopic cracks formed, not from damage, but from repetition. Salt found its way into those spaces. Once there, it stayed. Rust began as a suggestion, a faint discoloration near a seam, a soft orange hue around a bolt head, a line so thin it could be mistaken for shadow. It did not spread quickly. It did not announce itself. It simply existed. Over time, these small marks became familiar. They appeared where rainwater collected briefly before evaporating, along railings where hands had once rested, leaving behind oils that altered the surface just enough, near drains and scuppers where water paused before finding its way back to the sea. The ships aged evenly. There were no sudden failures, no dramatic collapses. The steel remained solid, even as its surface changed color and texture. Rust layered itself gradually, forming patterns unique to each vessel. Wind continued to move freely across decks now, empty of footsteps. It whistled softly through open structures. It passed through rigging that no longer shifted under tension. It carried the sounds of water and distant shore, blending them into a low, constant presence. Inside the ships, time moved differently. Cabins stayed dry, protected from direct exposure. Dust settled slowly, forming thin layers on flat surfaces. Fabrics stiffened slightly without use. Paper curled at the edges. Responding to changes in humidity, engine rooms remained quiet. The machines within them, once warm and active, cooled completely. Metal components rested in fixed positions. Oil settled. Systems designed for movement adjusted to stillness without complaint. Here, rust appeared more slowly. Moisture collected in subtle ways, condensing on cooler surfaces during temperature changes. Over long periods, this moisture left faint marks, but nothing sudden. The process was measured, respectful. Time did not rush these spaces. Outside. Rain arrived occasionally. It fell gently on decks, washing away loose salt before leaving behind its own contribution. Rainwater pooled briefly, then drained. In some places, it lingered just long enough to encourage further change. Paint continued to fade. Colors softened under constant sunlight. What had once been bright became muted. White turned creamy. Blues dulled. Reds deepened into earth tones. The ships blended more closely with their less distinct against sky and water. CABIRDS found new uses for these quiet vessels. They perched along railings, unconcerned with rust or peeling paint. They nested in sheltered corners, taking advantage of stillness. Their presence added subtle marks, small stains, feathers caught in crevices. But even these changes happened slowly. The ships accepted all of it. They did not deteriorate in protest. They simply adapted. Years passed. From a distance, the vessels still appeared whole. Their outlines remained strong. Their silhouettes unchanged. Only closer inspection revealed the passage of time written in texture rather than form. Steel felt rougher to the touch. Edges softened. Surfaces carried stories in layers of corrosion and weathering. The waterline told its own history, where hull met sea. Marks formed in bands, each one reflecting different conditions over time. Higher marks showed where storms had pushed water beyond its usual reach. Lower marks traced calmer periods. These lines accumulated quietly, recording years without words. Wind continued its work, smoothing some areas while leaving others untouched. It removed loose flakes of paint and rust, carrying them away grain by grain. It shaped the ships not through force, but through persistence. Nothing happened quickly, and that was the point. The passing of years is rarely dramatic. It is composed of small changes repeated endlessly. Rust does not arrive all at once. Salt does not overwhelm instantly. Time does not rush. Together, they move with patience. In the absence of human activity, the ships became part of a slower system, one governed by weather, water, and seasons rather than schedules. Summer heat expanded metal slightly more. Winter cold slowed everything down. Spring rain refreshed surfaces briefly. Autumn winds scattered leaves across decks, where they rested until carried away again. Each season left its trace, then moved on. The ships did not mind. They had carried cargo across oceans. They had weathered storms. They had endured long service. This quieter phase required nothing of them. They simply rested. For those who walked nearby, the changes were easy to overlook. A person might pass the same ship for years without noticing how much it had altered. The process was too slow to register, moment by moment. Only memory revealed the difference. This used to be brighter, someone might think, but there was no sense of loss. The ships were not being destroyed. They were being reclaimed gently, integrated into their environment rather than erased from it. Rust, salt, and time worked together not to end these vessels, but to soften them. They blurred sharp edges. They muted colors. They reduced contrast between ship and sea. Eventually, the ships looked as though they belonged exactly where they were. No longer visitors, no longer workers, just quiet presences on the water. And in this slow transformation, there was something deeply calming. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing required action. The changes unfolded without urgency or expectation. The ships waited, and time passed. And together, they demonstrated a simple truth, that even the strongest things are shaped most by patience, not force. In this quiet partnership between metal and sea, there was no conflict, only rest. There are places along the American coastline where motion seems to pause. Not entirely stop, but slow to such a gentle pace that it becomes almost unnoticeable. These places are quiet bays, sheltered coves, and wide river mouth anchorages, chosen not for activity, but for rest. Here, decommissioned ships lie motionless. They are arranged without ceremony, spaced carefully to allow water and wind to pass freely around them. Their anchors rest deep below the surface, set firmly into sediment that has not shifted in years. Lines, when present, remain slack and unstrained, responding only slightly to the slow rise and fall of the tide. Nothing urges these ships to move. The bays themselves feel designed for stillness. High shorelines block strong winds. Curving landforms soften waves before they reach the anchored hulls. Water enters gently and leaves just as quietly, following rhythms that change only with the seasons. The surface is often smooth. Small ripples spread outward from passing fish or drifting leaves. Reflections linger of sky, cloud, and ship undisturbed by wakes or passing traffic. Time seems to stretch here, unmeasured by schedules or destinations. Approaching one of these anchorages feels different from entering an active harbor. There are no horns, no cranes, no signals demanding attention. Instead, there is space, open water, long pauses between sounds. The ships appear almost as extensions of the landscape. Their hulls mirror the muted tones of their surroundings: grays, blues, softened whites. Rust marks blend with the earthy colors of shoreline and sediment. Nothing stands out sharply. They rest as though they have always belonged there. Each vessel occupies its place without urgency. Some face inland, others toward open water, oriented according to the conditions on the day they arrived. Their positioning rarely changes. There is no need. The river mouths hosting these anchorages move even more slowly. Freshwater drifts outward, meeting saltwater in gentle transitions. The surface may carry subtle color shifts, visible only when the light hits just right. Sediment settles gradually, reshaping the bottom in ways too slow to notice day by day. Ships anchored here experience barely perceptible movement. They rise and fall a few inches with the tide. They turn slightly with changes in current. These movements are so gradual, they often go unnoticed. Inside the vessels, everything remains as it was left. Decks stay empty. Railings feel cool beneath occasional touches. Hatches remain closed, protecting interior spaces from weather. There is no sound of footsteps. No vibration from engines. Only the soft sounds of the anchorage reach them. Water brushing against steel. Wind moving gently across open space. Distant birds calling without urgency. The absence of activity does not feel unnatural. It feels intentional. These anchorages were chosen precisely because they offer calm, because they allow ships to rest without strain, because they minimize wear rather than accelerate it. Maintenance visits, when they occur, are brief and quiet. Small boats approach slowly, creating minimal disturbance. Crews step aboard, perform checks, make notes, and depart without altering the atmosphere. The ships remain exactly as they were, still, steady, and undemanded. The land surrounding these anchorages often reflects the same pace. Trees along the shoreline grow undisturbed. Grasses bend gently with the breeze. Occasional structures weather docks. Unused pilings stand as silent markers of past activity. There is no rush to reclaim these spaces. They serve their purpose simply by existing. As daylight moves across the sky, shadows shift slowly over hulls and decks. Reflections change shape. The ships themselves remain unchanged, their outlines consistent against the horizon. Even the passage of seasons feels softened here. Summer brings warmer light and longer days. Winter introduces cooler tones and quieter air. Rain arrives gently, and snow, when it falls, settles briefly before melting away. Nothing interrupts the calm. In these anchorages, the concept of time becomes less precise. Days pass without noticeable difference. Weeks blend together. The usual markers of progress, arrivals, departures, schedules, are absent instead. Time is measured by subtler signs: the angle of sunlight, the depth of shadow, the level of water against the hull. For anyone observing from shore or from a small passing boat, the scene invites stillness. There is nothing to watch for, nothing expected to happen. The ships do not prepare for departure. They do not signal readiness, they simply remain. This stillness has weight, but not heaviness. It feels like rest. The ships, once defined by movement, now demonstrate another form of purpose. Presence without demand. They occupy space without consuming it. They coexist with water, land, and sky without altering their rhythms. Birds circle above them, fish move below them. Weather passes around them. The ships accept it all. At night, these anchorages become even quieter lights, if present, are minimal small markers for safety rather than activity. Reflections stretch across the darkened water. Unbroken by waves, but the ships appear almost suspended between elements, not moving forward, not drifting away, simply staying. This quiet endurance creates a sense of reassurance, in a world often defined by constant motion and change. These anchorages offer an alternative. They show that stillness can exist without loss. That rest can be a state of purpose. Nothing moves here, because nothing needs to. The ships have arrived at a place where effort is no longer required. They are held gently by water, protected by land, and shaped slowly by time. And in this motionless space, calm settles deeply, inviting the mind to slow, to rest, and to remain. Just as the ships do, long after the ships stopped sailing regularly. The paperwork continued. It did not hurry. It did not announce itself. It simply remained quiet, orderly, and patient, just like the industry it recorded. In offices tucked beside harbors and along quiet waterfront roads, filing cabinets still stood where they always had. Their drawers opened and closed with the same soft resistance. Labels, typed or handwritten decades earlier, remained legible. Dates, vessel names, inspection codes, and reference numbers rested in neat rows, waiting without urgency. This was the administrative side of maritime life, often overlooked, yet essential. Every ship had a paper trail that followed it everywhere. Before a vessel ever touched water, forms were created. During its years of service, those forms multiplied steadily, even after movement slowed and routes ended. The documentation continued, updated, reviewed, filed, and stored. There was comfort in this process. Maritime paperwork followed patterns refined over generations. Logs were written daily, even when nothing happened. Manifests listed cargo with careful precision, even when holds were empty. Inspection reports documented conditions that rarely changed, confirming again and again that systems remained intact. Each document had its place. Ship logs, often bound in simple covers, recorded time in a way that felt almost meditative. Entries followed a familiar structure: date, location, weather, status. On quiet days, the notes were brief. Vessel stationary. No change in condition. Routine inspection completed. These entries repeated themselves with only minor variations. There was no need for creativity. Accuracy mattered more than expression. Writing these logs required patience. Pens moved slowly across paper. Handwriting remained consistent, shaped by habit rather than emotion. The act of recording became a ritual, one that brought order to stillness. Manifests, once filled with detailed cargo lists, gradually simplified. Where there had once been pages of itemized goods, origins, destinations, there were now fewer entries, sometimes none at all. Yet the forms were completed anyway, marked clearly to reflect the absence rather than ignore it. Empty space was acknowledged, not skipped. Inspection reports followed similar rhythms. They were conducted on schedules that rarely changed, even as activity declined. Inspectors moved methodically through vessels, checking boxes and making notes that echoed previous reports. Hull condition, satisfactory. Systems, operational, no immediate concerns. These phrases appeared again and again, comforting in their predictability. The reports did not dramatize, they did not speculate, they simply observed. Once completed, each document followed a familiar path. It was reviewed, briefly, signed, stamped, filed. Filing itself became an art of repetition. Folders were labeled according to established conventions. Papers were aligned carefully before being placed inside. Cabinets were organized by year, vessel, or category, depending on long-standing systems that rarely needed explanation. Those who worked with these files knew exactly where everything belonged. They moved through offices quietly, retrieving documents without searching. Drawers slid open and closed smoothly. Papers were handled with care, not because they were fragile, but because routine demanded it, even as the industry slowly faded from prominence. The paperwork preserved its structure. There was no sudden end to these records. Instead, they grew thicker over time, documenting longer periods of inactivity. Pages accumulated, not with action, but with confirmation of stillness. Status unchanged. That phrase appeared often. It became a kind of refrain, simple, factual, and reassuring. Nothing unexpected had occurred. Nothing required immediate attention. In many ways, this administrative work outlasted physical labor. While docks grew quiet and ships rested motionless, officers remained active in their own subdued way. Clerks arrived each day, reviewed reports, updated logs, and maintained systems designed for continuity. The work was never rushed. Deadlines existed, but they were generous. Accuracy mattered more than speed. There was time to check entries twice, to ensure numbers matched, to verify dates. This slowness created calm. There were no alarms in paperwork, no sudden changes, no emergencies recorded in these later years. The documents reflected a world that had settled into predictability. Even the language used remained consistent, formal, precise, and neutral. No adjectives beyond what was necessary, no speculation. This restraint made the records feel steady, almost soothing. For those who spent hours among these files, the repetition became comforting. Each completed form reinforced a sense of order. Each filed report confirmed that the system still functioned, even if the ships no longer moved as they once had. Time passed quietly through these offices. Calendars changed. Years advanced, yet the procedures remained the same. Some files were eventually marked for long-term storage. Boxes were packed carefully, labeled clearly, and moved to archives. They joined thousands of others, each box containing a portion of maritime history, preserved not through stories, but through routine documentation in storage rooms. Shelves stretched long and orderly. Boxes rested undisturbed. Temperature remained controlled. Light was minimal. These records would not fade quickly. They were designed to last. And so, even as ships aged and harbors fell silent, the paperwork endured. It preserved the memory of movement through structure rather than narrative. It recorded presence through absence. It captured the final years of an industry not by announcing its end, but by continuing as though nothing had changed. There was something deeply calming about this. No dramatic conclusion, no final declaration, just continuation. The paperwork did what it had always done, documented reality as it existed. Without judgment, for anyone reading these records now, there is a rhythm to them. Page after page follows the same pattern. Dates progress slowly. Vessel names repeat. Conditions remain stable. The effect is almost hypnotic. It is easy to imagine the quiet offices where these documents were created. The steady ticking of a clock, the soft sound of paper turning, the muted click of a drawer closing. Outside, the harbor rested. Inside, order remained. Together, they formed a complete picture of an industry easing gently into stillness. One form at a time, and in this quiet world of logs and files, there is no urgency, no pressure, and no expectation of change. Only structure, only routine, only rest. Just like the ships they describe. When a ship has nowhere to go, life aboard it changes in subtle, almost unnoticeable ways. The transition is not sudden. There is no announcement, no moment when the ship officially becomes still. Instead, movement gradually fades, and what remains is a quiet that settles into every corridor, every compartment, every unused space. Walking aboard such a ship feels different from the first step. The deck does not vibrate beneath your feet. There is no low hum from engines preparing for departure. The air feels settled, undisturbed, as if it has been resting there for some time. Corridors stretch ahead in straight, orderly lines. They are clean, uncluttered, and softly lit. Overhead lights remain on, not because they are needed, but because they have always been on. Their glow reflects gently off painted walls, revealing surfaces untouched by recent movement. Footsteps echo here, not loudly, but enough to remind you how empty the space has become. Sound travels farther than it once did, unobstructed by conversation or activity. Each step fades slowly, lingering longer than expected. Doors along the corridors remain closed. They lead to offices, storage rooms, and sleeping quarters, each preserved exactly as it was left. Nameplates are still affixed. Labels remain clear. Nothing has been removed, because nothing needed to be. Inside the sleeping quarters, bunks wait quietly. Mattresses lie flat and undisturbed. Sheets are folded neatly, corners tucked in with care long ago. Lockers stand closed, their contents unchanged. Personal items, books, notebooks, spare clothing remain stored where they were last placed. These rooms do not feel abandoned. They feel paused. The air is still, holding faint traces of fabric and metal. Windows, when present, allow soft daylight to filter in, shifting gently as the sun moves across the sky. Shadows lengthen and shorten, marking time without sound. There is no urgency here, no alarms, no schedules, no need to wake. Further along the ship, the engine room rests in silence. This space, once defined by heat and motion, now feels expansive. Machines stand still, their surfaces cool to the touch. Pipes trace familiar paths overhead and along walls, carrying nothing but memory. The floor is clean. Tools remain arranged neatly, ready for use that never comes. Gauges sit at rest, needles fixed in place. Control panels are dark, their switches untouched. The absence of sound is noticeable. No vibration hums through the metal. No rhythmic pulse fills the air. Instead, there is a deep, steady quietude, only by the occasional distant sound of water brushing the hull. Standing here, it is easy to imagine how this space once felt alive, but now, it does not feel empty. It feels complete in its stillness. Moving upward through the ship, common areas reveal the same quiet order. Mess halls hold tables aligned carefully, chairs pushed in neatly. Countertops are clear. Storage cabinets are closed. Nothing suggests haste or interruption. Light fixtures cast soft illumination across surfaces that reflect gently, without glare. The room feels balanced, symmetrical, and calm. There are no signs of neglect, only the absence of use. Hallways leading to the bridge carry a similar atmosphere. Windows remain clean, offering clear views of the surrounding water. Curtains, when present, hang straight and unmoving. Equipment is powered down, but maintained. Its placement unchanged. The bridge itself feels especially quiet. This was once the center of attention, where decisions were made and courses set. Now, it serves as a place of observation rather than command. Chairs remain positioned near consoles. Instruments sit idle. Screens are dark. The view outside holds no urgency, just water, sky, and slow-moving clouds. From here, the ship appears to be exactly where it belongs. There is no sense of waiting for instruction, no anticipation of departure, only presence. As hours pass, aboard a ship with nowhere to go, time becomes less noticeable. Without routines to follow, minutes stretch gently. There is no need to measure the day. Light changes naturally, and with it, the mood of the ship shifts slightly. Morning light feels cool and soft. Midday brightness fills spaces evenly. Evening brings longer shadows and deeper tones. At night, the ship grows even quieter. Lights remain on in some areas, dimmed but steady. Outside, reflections shimmer faintly on the water. Inside, darkness settles comfortably into unused spaces. Sleeping quarters remain empty, yet ready. Bunks wait without expectation. Doors stay closed, preserving the calm within. The ship does not need rest, it is already resting. Occasionally, maintenance crews visit. Their presence is brief and respectful. They move slowly, checking systems, recording observations, making small adjustments. They do not disrupt the atmosphere. They leave things exactly as they found them, after they depart. The ship returns to silence. The corridors echo once more, then settle. The engine room remains still. The sleeping quarters remain unused. Nothing has changed, and nothing needs to. There is something deeply peaceful about this state. The ship no longer exists to serve schedules or demands. It no longer responds to cargo manifests or departure times. It simply occupies space, floating gently. Supported by water and shaped by air, its purpose has shifted from function to presence. Every detail, every railing, every doorway, every piece of equipment remains as evidence of careful design. The ship has not lost its identity. It has simply entered a quieter phase. For those who step aboard, the experience invites stillness. Movements slow naturally. Voices drop, even when speaking alone. The space encourages calm, as if sound itself feels unnecessary. This is life aboard a ship, with nowhere to go. A life defined, not by activity, but by rest. Not by motion, but by balance. Not by urgency, but by time passing gently, in this quiet. The ship teaches something simple. That stillness does not mean emptiness. That silence can be full. That rest can be a destination. And as the water continues its slow movement around the hull, the ship remains steady, patient, and at peace exactly where it is meant to be. Long before highways cut across the land and schedules sped up the day, there were American towns shaped almost entirely by water. They grew where rivers met the ocean, where bays curved gently inward, and where the shoreline offered safe anchorage. These towns did not rush. They developed at the pace of tides, seasons, and arriving ships. In these places, the sea was not scenery. It was structure. Main streets often ran parallel to the waterfront. Buildings faced the docks as naturally as homes elsewhere faced town squares. Warehouses stood close to the water, their doors wide and practical, designed to open and close without ceremony. Everything pointed toward the harbor, because everything depended on it. Morning, in these towns, began quietly. Before most of the town fully woke, the harbor was already present, calm, steady, and familiar. Water moved gently against docks. Masts and cranes stood still against the early sky. The smell of salt mixed with wood, rope, and weathered stone. People rose according to the needs of the sea. Dockworkers timed their days around tides. Shopkeepers opened when the first shift passed by. Fishermen checked conditions before deciding how far to go. Even those not directly involved in maritime work felt the influence. Appointments adjusted. Routines softened. Plans left flexible. Life here allowed for waiting. In coastal towns, waiting was not wasted time. It was part of the rhythm. Waiting for ships. Waiting for weather. Waiting for deliveries that arrived when they arrived. Children grew up understanding this. They learned early that some things could not be hurried. They watched ships approach slowly from the horizon, taking minutes that felt like hours. They listened to stories of delays caused by fog or wind, told without frustration. The sea decided the pace. Businesses reflected this patience. General stores stocked supplies based on shipping schedules rather than demand forecasts. Cafes served meals when workers arrived, not when clocks dictated. Offices closed early on days when the harbor was quiet, reopening without urgency when activity returned. There was no sense of loss in this. Flexibility, it felt natural. Houses were built to withstand coastal weather. Porches faced the water. Windows were designed to open wide for air movement. Materials were chosen for durability rather than style. Paint faded under salt and sun, then was reapplied without complaint. These homes aged gently, much like the ships they overlooked. In the evenings, the towns grew quieter. As harbor work slowed, streets emptied gradually. People gathered briefly, then returned home. Lights came on one by one, reflecting faintly on nearby water. From many homes, the sound of the sea could be heard, soft, constant, reassuring. This sound became part of sleep. Generations grew up falling asleep to it, barely noticing it as anything special. It was simply there. Like breathing, the towns did not separate work from life. Maritime trade influenced everything. From school schedules to holiday celebrations, ship arrivals were noted casually. Departures were acknowledged without ceremony. These movements were expected, not celebrated. Familiarity replaced excitement. Over time, the towns developed identities rooted in reliability rather than growth. They did not expand rapidly. They did not seek attention. They existed comfortably within their boundaries, shaped by geography and tradition. Then, slowly, the world changed. Trade routes shifted. Technology advanced. Transportation became faster and less dependent on coastal access. The sea remained, but its role softened. Ships arrived less often. Warehouses held fewer goods. Docks stayed empty longer between visits. The towns noticed these changes, but they did not panic, they adjusted. Some businesses closed quietly. Others changed their focus slightly. A hardware store added more local items. A cafe shortened its hours. A dockside office reduced staff without urgency. There were no sudden transformations, just gentle transitions. The harbor still defined the town. Even as activity decreased, people continued to walk along the waterfront. They continued to fish, to watch the tides, to talk about weather. The sea remained a presence. Even when commerce faded, older residents remembered busier times. They spoke of ships lined up at docks, of long days filled with movement and sound. These memories were shared calmly, without longing or regret. That's how it used to be, they might say. And then the conversation would move on. Younger generations experienced a different version of the same town. They knew the docks as quiet places. They played near warehouses that stood mostly unused. For them, the calm was not a change, it was normal. And so the towns settled into a new rhythm, not abandoned, not forgotten, just quieter. Shops that remained did so because they belonged there, not because they needed constant traffic. Homes continued to face the water. Streets remained wide and open. The sea still shaped daily life, though in gentler ways. Storms still mattered. Tides still mattered. Weather still mattered. These things could not be replaced by roads or screens. In many ways, the towns became places of reflection. Visitors noticed the calm immediately. They remarked on the stillness, the lack of hurry, the way time seemed to stretch. Residents nodded politely, already accustomed to it. This is how it's always been, they would say, if it wasn't exactly true, because the essence remained. The sea continued to define the towns. Character buildings aged gracefully. Signs faded slowly. Paint peeled and was repainted. Nothing demanded perfection. Everything allowed for wear. Even now, walking through such a town feels different. Footsteps echo slightly on quiet streets. The air feels open. The horizon remains visible from many angles, reminding everyone that space exists beyond schedules. There is room to breathe here. The towns no longer depend entirely on maritime trade, but they still carry its influence in every detail. In how buildings are arranged, in how people speak, in how days unfold without urgency. The sea taught these communities patience, and patience remained. Long after the ships stopped arriving regularly, as evening settles in, lights reflect off calm water once more. The harbor rests. The town rests. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to return. The sea is still there, steady, familiar, and unchanging, and the towns built around it continue to exist exactly as they always have, shaped by water, guided by time, and at ease with stillness. When a ship no longer moves, it does not become silent. Instead, it begins to speak in softer ways. These are not sounds meant to command attention. They do not interrupt thought or demand response. They exist quietly in the background, steady and reassuring, forming a soundscape that unfolds slowly and predictably suited to rest. Wind is usually the first sound you notice. It moves through rigging with a gentle patience, weaving itself around cables and lines that no longer tighten or release. The wind does not rush. It passes through open spaces, creating faint, shifting tones that rise and fall without pattern. Sometimes it hums, sometimes it whispers, sometimes it barely registers at all. The rigging responds subtly, producing soft vibrations rather than sharp noise. These sounds are never loud. They feel distant, even when close, as though the ship absorbs them before they can fully escape. The water adds its own layer. It rests against steel hulls with slow, repetitive motion. There is no crashing here, no urgency, just the gentle press and release of water, meeting metal. Wave after wave arrives without intention. Each one sounds almost identical to the last. A quiet lift, a soft touch, a smooth retreat. This repetition becomes calming. The ear begins to recognize the pattern, and the mind relaxes into it. There is no need to listen closely. The sound exists whether it is noticed or not. Occasionally, a small change occurs, a ripple from a distant current, a passing fish disturbing the surface, a leaf drifting into the water. These changes are minor, almost imperceptible. They blend seamlessly back into the steady rhythm, never breaking the calm. Then there is the creak of the ship itself. It is not the sharp sound of movement or strain. It is deeper, slower, low, measured response to temperature shifts and gentle motion. Metal expands and contracts quietly. Wooden elements adjust slightly. Joints settle into comfortable positions. These sounds happen infrequently. When they do, they feel familiar, almost reassuring, like the sound of an old house adjusting at night. They signal presence rather than disturbance. Inside the ship, the soundscape softens even further. Corridors carry distant echoes of wind and water, muted by walls and doors. The quiet feels layered, not empty. Each space holds its own version of stillness. In sleeping quarters, the sounds are faint and distant. A gentle hum from outside, a soft vibration through the structure. Occasionally, the quiet settling of materials responding to the environment. Nothing startles. Nothing surprises. Engine rooms, now silent, add their own subtle tone. Without machinery running, the space feels larger. Sounds do not bounce quickly here. They travel slowly, fading gradually into silence. The absence of mechanical noise allows other sounds to emerge. Natural and unforced drips are rare, but when they occur, they are slow and spaced far apart. One drop, then nothing for a long time. The rhythm remains gentle, never demanding attention. Above deck, the soundscape changes slightly with time of day. In the morning, wind may be lighter, water smoother. Sounds feel softer, more spaced out. As the day warms, air movement increases just enough to add texture without volume. Evening brings deeper tones. The water darkens. Sounds feel lower, slower. Wind settles into longer, steadier movements. Everything seems to prepare for rest. At night, the soundscape becomes even more subdued. Distant shoreline noises fade. The ship's own sounds take center stage, though they remain quiet and unobtrusive. Reflections of sound off calm water create a sense of depth rather than echo. The ship feels suspended in a pocket of calm. There is no mechanical interruption, no alarms, no signals. Just the ongoing conversation between wind, water, and structure. This soundscape is not dramatic. It does not build. It does not resolve. It simply continues. And because it continues without change, it allows the mind to let go. The predictability is key. Each sound follows expectations. Nothing arrives suddenly. The ear does not need to stay alert. It can relax, knowing that the next sound will be much like the last. Over time, these sounds blend together. Wind becomes part of water. Water becomes part of structure. Structure becomes part of silence. The boundaries between them soften. Listening becomes optional. The soundscape exists whether attention is given or not. It fills space gently, without pressure. For those nearby on shore, in small boats, or simply passing, the experience is the same. The sounds do not travel far. They remain close to the ships, contained, respectful. They do not intrude. This makes idle vessels feel safe. Their sounds are familiar, repetitive, and calm. They signal stability. Nothing is shifting quickly. Nothing is about to happen. The ships are not preparing to move. They are resting, and in their rest, they offer something rare, a natural rhythm that does not require participation. One can simply exist within it. Breathing slows naturally. Thoughts stretch out. The mind stops anticipating change. There is nothing to wait for. The gentle soundscape continues exactly as it is. Wind through rigging. Water against steel. The quiet creak of a ship adjusting slightly, then settling again. These sounds do not fade into silence because they do not need to. They remain steady, calm, and unchanging. And in that steadiness, the listener finds permission to rest. To let go. To drift. Just as the ships do. There was a time when many of these ships were built for urgency. They were launched during periods when speed of construction mattered, when purpose was clear, and when the sea carried more than commerce, it carried responsibility. Yet even then, their design favored steadiness over drama, reliability over spectacle. When wartime service ended, the ships did not disappear, they transited. The change was not abrupt. There were no grand announcements. Instead, these vessels moved gently from one role to another, adapting quietly to a world that no longer required them to hurry. During wartime, their days were structured and precise. Schedules were strict. Routes were determined carefully. Crews followed routines shaped by necessity and caution. Everything had a reason, and nothing was wasted. But when that chapter closed, the ships were still there, solid, capable, and ready for use. The nation looked at them not as relics, but as resources. They were cleaned, inspected, and reassigned. Equipment was adjusted. Interiors were modified to suit new purposes. Weapons were removed, replaced with cargo fittings or industrial systems. Paint schemes softened, shifting from functional tones to neutral, commercial finishes. The ships accepted these changes without resistance. They were built to serve in their new roles. They became part of everyday life. Cargo ships carried materials quietly between ports. Tankers transported fuel and liquids essential to growing industries. Support vessels assisted in construction, repair, and transport along coastlines and rivers. There was nothing heroic about this work, and that was the point. These ships thrived in routine. They followed predictable routes. They docked at familiar ports. They unloaded, loaded, and departed again. Their movements steady and unremarkable. Crews changed to the urgency of wartime service gave way to calmer routines. Watches were still kept, but without tension. Logs were still written, but entries became simpler. Days passed according to tides and schedules rather than alerts. Life, aboard, settled into a comfortable rhythm. Meals were regular. Sleep came easily. Conversations were quiet and practical. The sea remained the same, but the purpose of crossing it had softened. Years passed in this way. The ships aged, but gently. Their maintenance continued with care. Systems were updated when needed. Hulls were repainted. Engines were serviced. There was pride in keeping them operational. They had proven themselves durable, and that durability remained valuable. Over time, however, newer ships entered faster, more specialized. The industry shifted again, just as it always had. Once more, the older vessels faced transition. This time, the change moved even more slowly. Some ships were reassigned to secondary routes. Others were placed in reserve, maintained, but rarely used. A few were adapted further, serving in niche industrial roles where their sturdy construction remained useful. But gradually, their work lessened. They spent more time at dock. Voyages became infrequent. Crews grew smaller. Logs recorded longer. Periods of inactivity, yet there was no sense of failure. These ships had done exactly what they were. Built to serve steadily across changing needs. Eventually, retirement arrived. Not as an end, but as a pause. The ships were anchored in quiet waters. Their systems were preserved. Documentation continued. Maintenance schedules remained. Though simplified, they were not abandoned. They were resting. The transition from service to stillness happened gently. One final voyage might be logged without ceremony. One last cargo unloaded. One last engine shut down, recorded carefully. Then silence settled in. The ships did not miss movement. They adjusted. Their decks remained intact. Their corridors stayed orderly. Their structures held firm. The sea continued to support them, as it always had. From war service, to commercial work, to quiet retirement, the journey felt complete. Nothing had been rushed. Nothing had been wasted. Nothing had been lost. These vessels embodied continuity. They demonstrated how purpose can change without erasing value, how service can evolve without losing dignity. In their stillness, they carried every chapter of their history quietly within them. And now, as they rest in calm waters, they offer something new: not movement, not labor, but presence, a reminder that even the busiest lives can settle into peace, that even ships once built for urgency can find rest, and that retirement, when approached gently, can be just another form of service to stillness, to memory, and to time passing without hurry. Even when ships are no longer called upon to sail, they are never entirely left alone. There remains a quiet commitment to care, one that unfolds slowly, methodically, and without urgency. This care takes the form of routine maintenance, carried out not because something is wrong, but because preserving what already exists has value in itself. The process begins with inspection. A small crew arrives without ceremony. They step aboard carefully, their movements unhurried. There is no rush to complete tasks. The ship has been waiting, and it will continue to wait. Clipboards are carried. Checklists are reviewed. Each inspection follows the same pattern, repeated from visit to visit. The order rarely changes. There is comfort in this consistency. The hull is examined first. Workers move along the length of the ship slowly, observing the steel surface inch by inch. Their eyes trace familiar lines, following seams and welds that have been inspected countless times before. Nothing unexpected is anticipated. They look for surface rust. They note areas where paint has thinned. They check for streaks caused by water runoff. Each observation is recorded quietly, using language that remains consistent year after year. Minor surface corrosion, paint weathered, no structural concern. These phrases repeat. The repetition is intentional. It allows comparisons across time. It ensures that nothing is overlooked. It reinforces the steady nature of the work. Next comes the touch-up. Paint is prepared carefully. Colors are chosen to match existing tones as closely as possible, not to refresh appearance, but to maintain protection. There is no interest in making the ship look new, only in keeping it stable. Brushes move slowly. Each stroke follows the surface naturally. There is no need for speed. The paint spreads evenly, filling small imperfections, sealing exposed steel. The smell of paint lingers briefly, then fades. This process is repeated section by section. Workers move methodically, completing one small area before moving to the next. There is no jumping ahead, no shortcuts. When a section is finished, it is checked again. Coverage is confirmed, edges are smoothed, excess is wiped away. Then, they move on. Corrosion checks follow. These are performed with quiet attention. Tools are used gently, testing surfaces without force. Taps are light, listening for changes in sound that might indicate deeper issues. Usually, there are none. The steel responds solidly. The hull remains strong. Findings are noted, even when they are unremarkable. Conditions stable. No progression observed. These notes matter. They document continuity. They confirm that time has not accelerated decay. They provide reassurance. The process continues upward. Railings are inspected next. Hands run along metal surfaces, feeling for roughness. Bolts are checked for tightness. Protective coatings are evaluated. If needed, small adjustments are made. A bolt is tightened slightly. A flake of rust is brushed away. A thin layer of protective compound is applied. Nothing dramatic. Deck surfaces receive attention as well. They are swept clean. Drainage points are cleared. Areas prone to moisture are examined carefully. Water must move freely. It must not linger. This principle guides much of the maintenance work inside the ship. The routine continues. Compartments are opened. Air is allowed to circulate briefly. Surfaces are inspected visually. Equipment is checked for signs of moisture or corrosion. Again, nothing unusual is expected. And usually, nothing unusual is found. This repetition is not boring to those who perform it. It is reassuring. Each completed inspection confirms that the ship remains as it was. Each maintenance task reinforces stability. The workers know these ships well. They recognize subtle changes immediately. They remember how a particular area looked years ago. They notice even small differences. Though there are rarely many, their familiarity allows them to work quietly. There is little conversation. Words are exchanged only when necessary. The ship itself sets the pace. Breaks are taken naturally. Tools are set down. Hands are rested. Observations are reviewed. Then the work resumes. Nothing interrupts the rhythm. The same steps are followed each visit. Inspect, record, touch up, check again, over and over. This routine extends beyond the hull. Hatches are examined. Seals are checked. Hinges are lubricated. Small adjustments are made to ensure that everything moves smoothly when needed. Even though movement is rare, readiness is maintained. The philosophy is simple. Care prevents urgency by addressing small issues consistently. There is no need for major intervention. The ship remains stable, predictable, and safe. Documentation follows. Notes are transferred from clipboard to official records. Dates are logged. Conditions are described in familiar terms. There is no need for elaborate explanation. The forms are completed, signed, and filed, then the visit ends. The crew departs quietly, leaving the ship exactly as they found it, perhaps slightly more protected, but unchanged in spirit. The ship remains still. Time continues to pass. Months later, the routine repeats. The same areas are inspected. The same phrases are written. The same care is applied. Years pass in this way. The hull ages slowly, protected by attention rather than neglect. Rust appears, but it is managed. Paint fades, but it is refreshed where necessary. Nothing deteriorates quickly. Nothing is ignored. This steady maintenance reflects a deeper mindset. Even forgotten hulls are not abandoned. They are respected for what they have been and what they still represent. The work may seem repetitive, but it serves a purpose beyond preservation. It maintains calm. There are no emergencies, no sudden discoveries, no pressure. Each visit reinforces the idea that stability is possible when care is consistent. And so the ships rest. Supported not only by water, but by routine, inspected, maintained, preserved, quietly, exactly as intended. There are books that were never meant to entertain. They were not written to inspire, persuade, or surprise. Their purpose was simpler and quieter, to record rules, define procedures, and ensure consistency. Maritime regulations belong firmly in this category. They exist in thick binders, dense manuals, and carefully numbered pages. Their covers are plain. Their language is precise. Their tone is neutral to the point of calm detachment. And today, many of them remain exactly where they were last, placed on shelves, in offices, and inside filing cabinets, rarely opened, yet never discarded. These regulations were written during times when ships moved constantly and oversight was essential. Every procedure mattered. Every rule had a reason. Every code was followed carefully. The language reflects this seriousness. Sentences are long and deliberate. Definitions are repeated to avoid confusion. Terms are clarified, then clarified again. Nothing is left open to interpretation. Reading these manuals requires patience. Pages are filled with numbered sections and subsections. Paragraphs flow without variation in tone. There are no narrative breaks, no summaries, no conclusions, just continuation. Section after section. Many of these regulations begin with scope and applicability. They explain which vessels are covered, under what conditions, and during which operations. The descriptions are thorough, even when they seem unnecessary. For example, a rule might specify the type of vessel, its tonnage, its purpose, and its operating area, each detail laid out carefully, even if overlap occurs. This repetition is intentional. It ensures clarity. It removes ambiguity. It creates structure. Safety codes follow. These outline procedures that must be followed at all times, even during routine operations. Instructions are given step by step, without variation. Checklists are common. Before departure, confirm this. Verify that. Ensure compliance with another referenced section. Each item stands alone, yet connects back to previous sections. Cross-references appear frequently, guiding the reader to other pages, other chapters, other manuals entirely. It is easy to move slowly through these pages. The mind does not rush ahead. There is nothing to anticipate. Each sentence offers exactly what the last one did, information presented calmly and without emphasis. Emergency procedures are described with the same tone as routine ones. There is no heightened language, no sense of urgency, just clear instruction. In the event of personnel, shall equipment must be. The structure never changes. Even illustrations, when included, are practical rather than expressive. Simple diagrams, labels without decoration, no shading, no color, no unnecessary detail, everything serves function. Over time, as ships grew quieter and activity declined, these regulations did not change much. They were updated occasionally, revised, or reissued, but the core language remained the same. New additions replaced old ones, but the rhythm persisted. Section numbers shifted slightly, terminology adjusted, but the tone stayed steady. In offices where these manuals were kept, they remained accessible. They were not removed. They were not thrown away. They simply rested. Spines faded gradually. Paper yellowed slightly. Tabs marked important sections, though they were rarely used. Sometimes, a page would be opened briefly, a reference checked, a definition confirmed, a requirement verified. Then the book would close again, returning to its quiet place. These regulations now serve a different role. They are no longer consulted daily. They do not guide active voyages, yet they remain part of the system. Preserved out of respect for process and continuity, they represent an era when every movement required documentation. When compliance mattered not because it was enforced, but because it was expected. The language of these manuals reflects that mindset. There is no persuasion, no explanation of why a rule exists, only a statement that it does, shall, must, required. These words appear repeatedly, evenly spaced across pages. Reading them becomes a rhythm. The eye moves from line to line. The mind follows without resistance. There is nothing to question, nothing to interpret emotionally. This makes the experience unexpectedly calming. The predictability allows tension to drift. The structure holds the reader gently, requiring little engagement. Some sections describe equipment specifications in careful detail. Measurements are listed. Materials are defined. Tolerances are specified down to small increments. Each requirement is followed by a reference to another section where further clarification may be found. The chain continues. Other sections address record-keeping. Logs must be maintained. Records must be stored. Documentation must be available upon request. Timeframes are specified, though they often extend for years, 5 years, 10 years, indefinitely. These durations feel abstract, stretching far beyond daily concerns. As activity slowed, compliance continued quietly. Reports were filed. Manuals were kept current. Regulations remained in effect, even if rarely applied. There was no moment when these rules became obsolete. They simply became less visible. Yet they still exist. They wait patiently, ready to be consulted if needed. Their presence alone provides reassurance that systems remain in place, that order has not dissolved. Even now, reading through these pages feels like stepping into a slower world. A world where nothing is rushed, where clarity matters more than speed, where structure exists for its own sake. The language does not invite excitement, it invites rest. Sentences stretch evenly across the page. Paragraphs align neatly. There are no surprises. One section leads calmly to the next dot, and as the pages continue, the reader may find that attention softens. Thoughts drift. The repetition becomes soothing rather than tedious. This is not a failure of the text, it is its design. Maritime regulations were written to be stable, consistent, and enduring. They were never meant to entertain. They were meant to exist quietly in the background, supporting systems without drawing attention. Now, as the ships rest and the harbors remain calm, these manuals rest as well, their purpose fulfilled, their presence maintained, their pages still. They remain unread, not because they are unimportant, but because they have done their work, and in their stillness, they offer something unexpected, a reminder that even the most ordinary words, arranged carefully and repeated patiently, can create calm, a slow, steady calm. One page at a time. There are people who carry ships with them long after the water has grown quiet. They do not speak loudly about it. They do not tell dramatic stories. They simply remember. These are the sailors, engineers, and port workers who once knew the fleets not as history, but as daily presence. Their recollections are unhurried, shaped by routine rather than excitement, and offered without expectation that anyone needs to listen closely. They remember because remembering comes naturally. For a sailor, a ship was never just a vessel. It was a sequence of small details learned slowly over time. The way a deck felt underfoot during early morning watches, the sound a particular engine made when running smoothly, the way light entered the bridge at certain hours. These details did not stand out. When they were happening, they became meaningful only later. When silence replaced motion, an engineer might remember a ship by its systems, not by its name, but by how it behaved. Which valve required a gentler touch? Which gauge always read slightly higher than expected? Which pump had a rhythm that could be trusted without looking? These memories are not dramatic, they are precise. I knew that engine, an engineer might say quietly. It ran steady. That is all. Port workers remember ships differently. They recall outlines first, the height of a hull, the width of a deck, the placement of a ladder. They remember how long it took to secure lines, how cargo sat in the hold, how the ship responded when fully loaded. They remember patterns, which ships arrived early, which ones waited, which ones required extra care at the dock. These recollections come without effort. They surface during quiet moments, while looking out at the water, while walking past an old berth, while hearing a familiar sound carried by the wind. There is no rush to share them. When they do speak, their words are measured. They might mention a ship's name once, then move on. Or they might not mention names at all, referring instead to that one tanker or the old freighter. Specifics are less important than familiarity. These people remember ships the way others remember streets, or rooms places passed through often enough to become part of the background. For many of them, the work was never about adventure, it was about repetition. Sailors recall days that blended together, watches that began and ended without distinction, meals eaten at the same times, in the same places, with the same quiet conversations. Engineers remember maintenance routines more clearly than voyages, checking oil levels, listening for changes in sound, recording readings that rarely changed. Port workers remember the weight of lines, the feel of rope against gloved hands, the steady patience required to wait for tides. None of these memories demand attention. They exist calmly, stored away, ready to appear when invited. As the fleets grew quieter, these people noticed before anyone else. They felt the change in the absence of routine, in longer gaps between arrivals, in fewer familiar shapes at the docks. They did not react strongly. They simply adjusted. Memories began to replace experiences, gradually and without resistance. Now, when they walk near quiet anchorages or inactive ports, recognition comes easily. That ship's been there a long time, someone might say. Not as a complaint, not as a lament, just an observation. They might remember when it last moved, not the date, not the reason, just the sense of it. These recollections are low energy. They do not seek to explain or preserve. They are not organized into stories with beginnings and endings. They are fragments, a smell, a sound, a familiar shape against the horizon. Sometimes memories surface while doing something unrelated. An engineer hears a distant mechanical hum and pauses briefly. A sailor notices the angle of sunlight on water and thinks of a bridge watched long ago. A port worker sees a coil of rope and remembers hands moving automatically. Without thought, these moments pass quietly. They do not interrupt the present. They sit alongside it. There is no urgency to record these memories. Those who carry them do not feel they are disappearing. They are content to let them exist without documentation, if asked. They might share a few, but they do not insist. They know that ships, like routines, do not need constant retelling to remain real. The fleets they remember were not famous. They did not make headlines. They did not feature in grand narratives. They moved goods. They followed schedules. They did their work and returned. That was enough now. As those ships rest, so do the memories. They are not polished. They are not dramatic. They are not nostalgic in the usual sense. They are simply present. A sailor might remember standing at the rail during a calm night, nothing happening. Nothing expected to happen. An engineer might recall sitting in the engine room, listening, knowing everything was functioning as it should. A port worker might remember a long afternoon with no arrivals, just waiting, unbothered. These memories do not ask for attention. They are complete as they are, and perhaps that is why they feel so restful. They reflect a way of working and living that valued steadiness over excitement, familiarity over novelty, presence over performance. The seafarers who remember every ship do not feel that something has been lost. They feel that something has settled. The ships are still there, even if they no longer move, and the memories remain quiet and steady, carried without effort, just like the sea on a calm day. There was no single day when commerce decided to leave the harbors behind. No announcement was made. No final shipment marked the end. Instead, movement changed directions slowly, almost politely, as if careful not to disturb what had already been built. For a long time, traditional shipping remained the quiet backbone of American trade. Ships carried goods steadily along coastlines and through inland waterways. Ports handled materials with practiced ease. The system worked because it had always worked, and because its pace matched the natural rhythms of water and weather. But beyond the horizon, other systems were forming. They did not arrive all at once. They developed gradually, finding their place alongside maritime trade before eventually taking on more responsibility. Rail was among the first. Tracks extended inland, connecting towns that had never relied on water access. Trains moved according to schedules that were less influenced by tides and storms. They ran day and night, guided by signals rather than currents. At first, rail complemented shipping. Goods arrived by sea, then traveled inland by train. Ports remained busy. The sea still mattered over time. However, rail routes expanded. Trains grew longer. Infrastructure improved. Movement became more predictable. Some cargo no longer needed to wait for a ship. Then came air transport. At first, it served specialized needs like time-sensitive items that required speed rather than volume. Airports developed quietly, away from harbors, operating on entirely different rhythms. Air freight did not replace shipping immediately. It simply offered another option. As technology advanced, aircraft became more efficient. Routes multiplied. Reliability increased. Certain goods that once traveled by water now traveled through the sky. Shipping noticed the change, but did not resist it. The system had always adapted. The most subtle shift came later, with digital logistics. Thus, change was not physical. It did not involve new vehicles or routes. It involved information. Tracking systems improved. Scheduling became precise. Inventory was managed remotely. Decisions were made quickly, often far from ports and docks. Commerce began to move not just faster, but differently. Goods still existed. They still needed to be transported. But the emphasis shifted toward coordination rather than movement alone. Shipping routes were optimized, some were eliminated, others became secondary. Traditional shipping did not disappear. It simply became quieter. Harbors that once served as central hubs found themselves handling fewer goods. Ships arrived less often. Cargo volumes decreased. This happened gradually enough that it did not feel like loss. It felt like transition. Businesses adjusted their expectations. They planned around rail schedules rather than tides. They prioritized speed over familiarity. They invested in systems that required fewer physical pauses. Ports adapted as well. Some modernized to accommodate different types of vessels. Others shifted focus toward storage or maintenance. A few accepted a quieter role, serving specialized or regional needs. The sea remained, but its role softened. Communities noticed these changes, but without alarm. Trucks became more common on roads near towns that once relied on docks. Warehouses moved inland. Employment patterns shifted gently. Over years rather than months, there was no urgency to react. Traditional shipping had never been about speed, it had been about consistency. As commerce moved elsewhere, that consistency remained valuable, even if less visible. Ships continued to serve where they were best suited. Bulk goods, long-distance transport, routes where time mattered less than reliability. But the center of activity had moved, and so the harbors grew calmer. Ships spent more time waiting, docks stood empty longer. The soundscape changed: fewer engines, fewer horns, more space between events. This calm was not a sign of failure. It was simply the result of redistribution. Commerce had not stopped. It had spread out. Rail handled some routes, air handled others. Digital systems coordinated everything quietly in the background. Traditional shipping continued, but without the constant pressure it once carried. For the ships, this change felt natural. They had always followed demand. When demand shifted, they adjusted. Some vessels were reassigned, others retired. Many remained where they were, maintained and ready. The water did not mind it. It continued its cycles, unaffected by logistics trends. Ports, too, settled into their new roles. Some became quieter places of storage and maintenance. Others focused on niche trade. A few transformed into spaces for reflection, history, or simple presence. None of this required urgency. The movement of commerce had always been gradual. Even now, the systems coexist. Rail lines run inland. Aircraft cross the sky. Digital signals move instantly. And ships remain on the water, steady and patient. Each system operates at its own pace. Traditional shipping no longer carries the weight of everything, and that is okay. It has earned its rest. The shift away from water was not an ending, it was an adjustment, a slow rebalancing, one that allowed ships to become quieter without losing relevance, and harbors to become calmer without becoming empty. Commerce moved elsewhere. But the sea remained steady, open, and unchanged. And in that quiet continuity, there is peace. The kind that comes not from stopping entirely, but from letting each thing settle where it belongs. As the long story of movement, labor, and routine slowly fades, it arrives at a place of rest. Not an ending, but a settling. A gentle pause where nothing more is required. Along quiet stretches of shoreline, the ships remain. They rest beside the shore, as if they have chosen these places, carefully protected coves, calm bays, and wide river mouths where water moves slowly and predictably. Here, there is no pressure to depart, no expectation of readiness. The ships sleep, not in the way living things sleep, but in a deeper, steadier sense. A sleep without dreams, a rest without anticipation. They float, supported by water that has carried them for decades. Now holding them still, from a distance, they appear unchanged. Their outlines remain strong against the horizon. Masts and superstructures rise gently above the waterline. Hulls sit comfortably in the water, neither strained nor drifting. Up close, everything feels softened. Edges are less sharp. Colors have mellowed. Surfaces reflect light differently now. shaped by time rather than use. The ships no longer stand out, they belong. The water around them moves slowly. Small waves brush against steel with the same patience they always have. Tides lift and lower hulls by inches, barely noticeable. Reflections stretch and settle, uninterrupted by wakes. Nothing urges movement, the ships do not lean forward. They do not respond to signals. They do not prepare, they rest. On deck, there are no footsteps. Railings feel cool and steady. Lines remain coiled, untouched, responding only to changes in temperature and light. Hatches stay closed, protecting the quiet within. The air feels still, not heavy, not empty, just settled. Inside, corridors hold a gentle darkness. Light filters in through windows and portholes. Moving slowly as the sun crosses the sky, shadows shift without sound. Doors remain closed, preserving the calm of unused spaces. Sleeping quarters remain prepared. Bunks wait, though no one will return to them. Sheets remain folded. Lockers stay closed. Nothing has been taken away. These spaces are complete as they are. Engine rooms, once alive with motion, now rest fully. Machines are silent. Gauges remain still. The absence of vibration feels natural, as if the engines themselves have accepted this quiet. Nothing is broken. Nothing is missing. Nothing is expected. The ships have entered a phase where effort is no longer required. Maintenance continues quietly. Occasional visits ensure stability. Small adjustments are made to preserve balance rather than function. The ships remain safe, secure, and undemanding. Then the visitors leave. Silence returns. Time passes gently here. Days blend into one another. Seasons move slowly across hulls and decks. Summer light warms surfaces. Winter cools them again. Rain arrives softly, then moves on. The ships respond without complaint. They expand slightly in heat. They contract in cold. They adjust patiently, just as they always have. At night, the scene deepens. Lights are minimal. The water darkens. The ships appear almost suspended between sky and sea. Sounds are few. Wind moves softly through remaining rigging. Water touches steel quietly. Occasionally, the ship shifts its weight just enough to produce a low, familiar creak. These sounds do not interrupt. They soothe. For those nearby on shore, passing by, or simply listening, the presence of these ships invites stillness. There is nothing to watch for, nothing to wait for, nothing to do that the ships are not waiting for. Permission to move, they are finished moving. This rest is not abandonment, it is completion. Every journey has been made, every role fulfilled, every routine repeated until it no longer needed repetition. The ships have arrived exactly where they are meant to be, in their stillness. They reflect something deeply human, the idea that rest is not a reward for effort, but a natural stage that follows it. That value does not disappear when activity ends. That presence alone can be enough. These vessels, once defined by motion, now define calm. They demonstrate that strength does not require constant proof. That endurance can exist quietly. That usefulness can evolve into peace. Standing near them, the mind begins to slow. Breathing softens. Thoughts stretch out and loosen their grip. The constant need to anticipate what comes next fades. The ships are not thinking about tomorrow, they are simply here as the water continues its gentle movement and the shore remains close. The ships sleep beside it steady, supported, and at ease. They do not drift away. They do not wake. They rest, and in their rest, they offer an invitation to let go of urgency, to release expectations, to settle into stillness, just as they have. The long story ends, not with departure, but with quiet, not with motion, but with rest. And as the night deepens and the shoreline grows still, the ship remains, leaping beside the shore, carrying calm into the dark, and holding it there, patiently, until morning.